way, all our recorded webinars, and they're all recorded, are on our YouTube channel. You can also access them from our website. So if you go to YouTube and just in your search enter Center for Deep Green Faith, up will come. And you can then click on that and access the webinars there. Our plan, when I can get my act together, is to curate them by playlists. So if you're interested in spirituality, you'll be able to select those, or theology or church. And so you don't have to thumb your way through all of them. And we will also have a link to that teaching resources on our website. That's a work in process. So I've just started that. So I think now we're ready to go. I'll turn it over to Julia and John. Julie, will you do us the honors?
Certainly. This prayer comes from Episcopal Liturgical Materials for Honoring God in Creation. God, maker of marvels, you weave the planet and all its creatures together in kinship. Your unifying love is revealed in the interdependence of relationships in the complex world that you have made. Save us from the illusion that humankind is separate and alone, and join us in communion with all the inhabitants of the universe through Jesus Christ, our Redeemer, who topples the dividing walls by the power of your Holy Spirit, and who loves and reigns with you forever and ever. Amen.
Well, thank you, Julia. And I'd like to begin with just saying a few things about the idea of this evening's webinar. We thought it appropriate to think first about a saint. When we think of patron saints of creation care, one thinks, of course, of Saint Francis and so on. But Hildegard of Bingen is another figure who certainly merits attention. And that's why we decided in the parish of St. Mark and St. Paul on the Mountain, as we're called, to take this saint as our inspiration. And so we thought this evening we'd spend a bit of time first, and Julia Bates here will be commenting about Hildegard's life. And then we hope to explore some of the bridges from that background, that historical figure, to from the more theoretical to the practical, the case of parish life, the parish experience. And so I'll briefly introduce our panelists for that enterprise. Julia Bates will, who's before you here, will say something about, as I say, the life vocation of Hildegard of Bingen. Julia is an educator who has been dedicated to the education of young people and other people for many decades and many different circumstances. She has also been involved in many forms of community service that continue to this day. And she has a background rooted in the earth. She grew up in a farm family in Iowa, and is heir both to Moravian church traditions and Episcopal and other traditions. So we're happy to have her to perform that function. And we have two other members of our parish, Diane Jones and Mary Priestley, who are also part of our Hildegard Guild, and they'll speak about some of the creative implications and the arts which are relevant to this enterprise. So maybe I'll say just a few words about, because from here, Julia will elaborate on the vocation of Hildegard. Hildegard was many things. She was a mystic, a composer of music, one of the first composers of music of whom we actually have written record. She was a healer. She was actually an abbess, of course, of a religious order. She was a preacher, actually licensed by the Pope to preach, unusual in that 12th century circumstance. And last but not least, she was a theologian. As one of the Hildegard's scholars, Carolyn Walker Bynum, one of the leading scholars of Hildegard, calls her a visionary theologian. And I think that's an apt term. Much of her work is concerned to describe the interaction between familiar doctrinal concepts, creation, salvation, redemption. What are the fuller implications of that for the life of the Spirit? That was one of Hildegard's major concerns, and a theological concept that is crucial for our enterprise is what's often called viriditas, that Latin term that she actually invented in its application, which at the simplest level is greenness, but means much more than simply the chlorophyll of botanical creatures. What does greenness mean? We'll be exploring that, but viriditas for Hildegard means has implications not so far removed from a lot of our strangely present day green this and green that, because it has connotations of vitality, organic growth, hope, fertility, and last but not least, creativity. Terms we don't always think of when we think about environmental care, creation care, and so forth. What is the role of the creative arts? And that's why we have a couple people involved in that. I would suggest that above all, what's really seminal in Hildegard's notion of viriditas is the way in which it draws together the physical realm, what we would call bios, the ecology of the natural world that we're used to calling that, with the deep ecology of the spiritual world. Bios and beauty are inseparable in Hildegard's vision. And I think that's what is really important. What we think of as simply the life principle. That philosopher Henri Bergson, in the beginning of the 20th century, talked about the life principle, resembles what Hildegard is talking about. But for Hildegard, it's above all quickened by the Holy Spirit. And that is part of her vision. So I want to just finish by just quoting a little touch before we go on to Julia's fuller exposition of one of her liturgical chants, because she wrote a number of liturgical chants. This one, O Nobilissima Viriditas. So it's got Viriditas right there in the title. O noblest green viridity, you are rooted in the sun. And in the clear, bright calm, you shine within a wheel that no earthly excellence can comprehend. And on that note, I'm happy to turn things over to Julia Bates.
Thank you, John. First, I want to begin by thanking the Deep Green Faith Initiative for inviting us to speak about Hildegard, as we are yet a young group full of enthusiasm for recycling and exploring solar panels. We're grateful to you for being such kindred spirits. This invitation has sparked an even sharper focus on our spiritual mentor, Hildegard of Bingen. I'll begin with a brief biography of Hildegard and her concept of deep green or viriditas. Mary Priestley and Diane Jones will follow with their presentation on Hildegard's art, and John Gatta will tie it all up with a theological reflection. Secondly, I'm going to use this model of change. I studied change theory in graduate school. You'll recognize it as the ancient image of eternity. And David Hurst, who is a professor in Canada, wrote about it in his Crisis and Renewal, Meeting the Challenge of Organizational Change. And I found his model in this book called Resurrection Matters, which is both a narrative by Nuria Parish about her efforts to tie a farm to her church body, and it's a guidebook about how groups can plan and implement ecological projects tied to their churches. We begin at the pinch point of this model. I'm going to figure out how my hands work. With the birth of Hildegard. She was born to a noble family in Bermersheim, which would be East Germany or now Germany, in 1098. She was the 10th child, a miracle that a woman survived 10 childbirths. And the family considered her the tithe, the 10% that they owed the church. So at the age of 8, she was given to a saintly woman named Jutta to become a recluse at the Disi-Bodenberg Monastery. In her later writing of Vita, Hildegard notes that she began having visions at the age of 3, but she was afraid to tell anyone. Sometime between 1112 and 1115, their small section of the monastery became a convent under the supervision of the abbot, and Hildegard took vows at the age of 14. She was literate in German, and she taught herself Latin by listening attentively to the liturgy that flowed around her. Her written work was proofread by Volmar, her confessor, who was a supportive monk at Disi-Bodenberg, whom she credits for addressing her writing weakness. Mentor Jutta was an herbalist and healer, and her talents brought not only patients, but also new nuns and monks to the monastery. If we look at our model, we are moving up from the center point, as Hurst would say, to gather friends and support. Under Jutta's guidance, Hildegard became adept at mixing tinctures and providing healing processes. Rather scientifically, she kept notes about applying these modes of healing that later became the works Physica and Causae et Curae. Hildegard assumed the leadership of the abbey dispensary, and after Jutta died, when Hildegard was 38, Hildegard assumed the abbess position. This intense work with plants and healing is perhaps the foundation of Hildegard's core concept in her theology, which she called viriditas. In her first work, Scivias, a book that took her 10 years to write, she contrasts a vision she had of the vice of avarice with the virtue of generosity. She said, "I saw in the form of a woman," meaning avarice, "at whose back a tree was standing wholly dried up and without leaves, and by whose branches the woman was embraced. Her feet were of wood." She contrasts that with her, her vision of sitting in God's abundance with flowers and roses in her lap. Mary Priestley, in her presentation of Hildegard's art, will more closely examine Hildegard's mandala, of the tree of creation. Upon completion of Scivias, Hildegard daringly wrote to a monk named Bernard of Clairvaux, asking for permission to write about and present descriptions of her visions, which she notes are direct messages from God. In her letter, we have some sense of the outer dynamics of power that she faced both within the church and the civil structures of time, which gave scant hearing to the voice of women. The church had become repressive and scrutinized every attempt at defining a theology which might challenge the official narrative. In her apologetic letter, we hear how she had to work around the power positions held by men. She says, "Venerable Father Bernard, you are wonderfully in high honor by the power of God. You are a terror to the unlawful foolishness of the world. Father, I ask you by the living God to attend to my questions. I'm very concerned by these visions, which has appeared to me in the spirit of mystery, for I have never seen it with the external eyes of flesh. I, who am miserable and more than miserable in my womanly existence, have seen great wonders since I was a child, and my tongue could not express them if God's spirits did not teach me to believe." She asks Father Bernard to approve of her writing. She begs his acceptance not only of the word, but of the sacred sound through which all creation resounds. One historian, Mark Atherton, suggests that perhaps she's implying an idea of music as the essential fabric of the cosmos. She will go on to create her own musical notation system and even write an opera. Rhetorically, Hildegard has laid the interpretation of her visions onto Father Bernard's shoulders and does not claim that the vision is caused by any of her personal powers, nor does she give herself status because of these visions. She has moved her efforts up the curve of change as she speaks to a larger, more powerful audience about her visions. She also now has the full institutional support of a building, a scriptorium, and ready workers. Hurst notes that at this point in an organization, individuals may be slotted into roles and processes. She received Bernard's encouragement in 1150 and later even more encouragement after the Treaty of Constance in 1153 between Emperor Frederick I and Pope Eugenius III, which resolved some of the conflicts between the power of the Pope and the power of a king. Bernard at that time gave a copy of Scivias to the Pope, who encouraged Hildegard to keep recording her visions. Emboldened, she begins to write letters of advice and sometimes chastisement to the Pope and to the king, even as new popes and kings came and went. She began to be widely consulted as a prophetess. Her convent grew to the extent that the whole institution was moved to a new site, Rupertsberg near Bingen, which was gifted by one of the fathers of her nuns, Ricardus of Stade, who at the time was the head of the scriptorium that copied Scivias and the image that Hildegard created to display her visions. Later, Ricardus was pulled from Rupertsberg convent by her parents and given a convent of her own to run. However, Hildegard carried on, though Hurst might warn that these cracks in personnel and process are early warning signs to an organization or project that it needs to adapt. Eventually, she was given permission to go on preaching tours throughout what is now Germany. Again, in terms of the change model, Hildegard is moving upwards in terms of strength. So she is going from the center point all the way up to the top of the loop. Three years after her last tour, Hildegard died at the age of 82. At this peak point of achievement, we might ask what happens to her vision and her green cosmic theology. The convent continued another 500 years until it was destroyed in 1632 during the 30 Years' War. However, the sister convent started by Hildegard at Bingen across the river from Rupertsberg survived. The nuns there were dedicated to preserving the manuscripts and art of Hildegard. However, in 1803, the convent was dissolved. 100 years later, in the early 20th century, a new convent was built. The nuns there faithfully copied all of Hildegard's work. In the early years of World War II, the nuns sent the original works to Dresden for safekeeping. Those artifacts haven't been found since the firebombing there. But the copies are still available for academic study in Bingen. Her name and work began to resurface in the 1980s with the emergence of the environmental movement and work by women to assume larger roles in church life. So if we look at the model, the Hildegard project seems to have dropped off precipitously down here to the bottom. Hurst suggests that at this point, at the bottom of the loop, is a latent time in the life of an institution, project, or movement. What remains, like the embers of an old fire, are the values and vision of the initial project. Like in a destroyed old forest, new seedlings can emerge. So why start a Hildegard group now? We also live in a time of patriarchal repression and standardization, when leaders are ignoring all data about the needs of the environment and are limiting the lines of communication between regions in this country and between us and the rest of the world. Churches can feel hollowed out as congregations age and few younger people join. It may be hard for us to feel visionary. Hildegard lived in a similarly repressive era. Her work may serve as a useful model for our efforts to restore both the earth and spiritual practices as we enter the second loop of the model, carrying forward her concept of viriditas. How can we gather fellow visionaries and combine our energies and ideas to strengthen both faith communities and creation? I'd like to end with a poem by Wendell Berry, a Kentucky farmer and poet, called A Vision. If we will have the wisdom to survive, to stand like slow-growing trees on a ruined place, renewing, enriching it, if we will make our seasons welcome here, asking not too much of earth or heaven, then a long time after we are dead, our lives prepare, will live here, their houses strongly placed upon the valley sides, fields and gardens, rich in the windows. The river will run clear as we never know it, and over it bird song like a canopy. On the levels of the hills will be green meadows, stock bells ring in noon shade. On the steeps where greed and ignorance cut down the old forest, an old forest will stand, its rich leaf fall drifting on its roots. The veins of forgotten springs will have opened. Families will be singing in the fields. In their voices, we will hear a music risen out of the ground. They will take nothing from the ground. They will not return, whatever the grief at parting. Memory, native to this valley, will spread over it like a grove, and memory will grow into legend, legend into song, song into sacrament. The abundance of this place, the songs of its people and its birds, will be health and wisdom and indwelling light. This is no paradisal dream. Its hardship is its possibility. Thank you again for inviting the Hildegard Guild from St. Mark's and St. Paul's. I turn at this time to Mary Priestley and Diane Jones, who embody many of Hildegard's talents in their own art, music, and creative writing. Mary will speak of Hildegard's creative expressions of viriditas. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Robin, can you put up our visuals, please?
I will give it a shot
it's
here.
funny about any committee, including a church committee, all these individuals. The way I remember it is we had a year of adult forum programs on creation care, including Robin coming at really very eloquently talking about the role of the church in creation care. Got us moving ever so slowly, just as you describe a seedling. And then we decided we needed to get rolling at least with recycling. I remember saying to John Gatta, it seems to me we need a patron saint. And I mean, without skipping a beat, John said, Hildegard of Bingen, viriditas. And so we learned how to spell Hildegard. We were about to learn how to spell viriditas, and we're off and rolling, starting with, as Julia said, getting an augmented recycling program, and now thinking about solar energy. I love this. I think my introduction to Hildegard was through Matthew Fox's book on the Illuminations of Hildegard Bingen. And I love his statement that she has demonstrated that the missing link between science and spirituality is art. And so we are trying to infuse our work with art. Robin, if you could move that forward, please. Thank you. So this is our symbol that we have on the right. And I've got it right here beside one of Hildegard's most famous, I think, illuminations that Matthew Fox describes as cultivating the cosmic tree. I think Hildegard didn't really name these visions this, but anyway, this is the one. It shows over the course of a year, if you start it at 12 o'clock and move around clockwise, a person taking care of this tree or taking care of nature over the course of his or her life. And then as you get to 11 o'clock, the tree loses all of its leaves and the person dies. But it's just an absolutely beautiful thing. And then the winds, and of course, wind, she's equating with breath and spirit and so forth, coming in from these animals on the periphery. And here she is in the corner. So I took that, which I guess is my favorite of her images, to do our symbol. And you can see that roughly the tree kind of resembles the tree in the book. Trees denote the life of the cosmos, its consistent growth, proliferation, generative and regenerative processes, and stands as a symbol for inexhaustible life. So that's right in the very middle. The sun is rendered the way, well, quite similar anyway to several of her images when she puts the sun in there. And as Matthew Fox comments, it's appropriate to remember Hildegard with light imagery, since that is how she describes her spiritual awakening. So we've got the sun right there. Viriditas, of course, the word coined by Hildegard to mean greening power. She talks about the exquisite greening of trees and grasses, of earth's lush greening. All of creation and humanity in particular is showered with greening refreshment, the vitality to bear fruit. The cloud is drawn to look similar to those in Hildegard's, that image to the left. I don't know if you can really see some of the wiggly clouds, but Hildegard said, I saw how moisture from the gentle layer of air flowed over the earth. The air revived the earth's greening power and caused all fruits to put forth seeds and become fertile. From the gentle layer of air, moisture effervesces over the earth. This awakens the earth's greenness and causes all fruits to appear through germination. And then the little flowers on the ground are similar to those found in many of Hildegard's illuminations. And then the hand encircling and supporting the tree and its environments is a modern image, obviously, that stands for environmental protection, stewardship, sustainability, nurturing, and so forth. And it's circular, which a lot of her images, her mandalas were. So anyway, this is our image. I want to move to the next slide, and Diane Jones, who she and I both took Julia Cameron's Creativity and Spirituality program, 12-week program, and is an artist in her own right. Diane.
God has gifted creation with everything that is necessary. Humankind, full of all creative possibilities, is God's work. Humankind is called to co-create. God gave to humankind the talent to create with all the world. I come to Hildegard through her illuminations from the perspective of being a calligrapher and illuminator and illustrator. So I too have studied Matthew Fox's books for years and years. In fact, it's falling apart right now and I need to get it rebound. But this is an example of a piece of work that I have done. I incorporate the natural world in my artwork using scenes from nature, flora and fauna to illustrate the words. I believe that interacting with nature is the best way to express the meaning of the text. This is an illustration of Mount Rainier in Seattle, the location of the wedding of this couple. Wedding guests were asked to sign this, their names on the artwork on either side of the center part there that has their names. Those were the wedding guests. So the result is an expressive creation of a specific place in nature that brought everyone close to God. I have found that one of my favorite things to do is to sketch in nature, to carry my sketchbook and my watercolors out on a walk and draw what I see, whatever appeals to me, whatever I'm called to do. I feel like that cements that space within my heart and my mind. I can look back at those sketches that I did and remember exactly what I was thinking, what a prayer was that I had at the time. And it really helps to enrich my memories. So a lot of people say, well, I can't draw and I don't have any talent, but that's not really what matters. And I think Hildegard would agree with me. The important thing is to get out in nature and to observe and to look carefully. Mary and I have talked about Julia Cameron's artist dates. If any of you have read her book, she talks about going on an artist date where you pick something that perhaps you've never done before or something that might enrich your life and you just go and do it. Go to a museum. I had a friend one time who rented a jet ski on a lake. Just pretty much anything goes as long as you label it an artist date and it stimulates your creativity. So one of the things I like to do is, for example, I'll decide today I'm going to look at trees. So I'll walk around and look at the bark on different trees and notice little creatures, notice little faces, notice how bark differs, how it feels when I touch it. It's just a matter of not being an accomplished artist, but identifying yourself with nature. So yeah. So I guess that's all I have to say about this slide. So you want to move on to the next one? Just as the person shall never end until into dust they are transformed and resurrected, just so their works are always visible. The good deeds shall glorify, the bad deeds shall shame. Hildegard of Bingen. So this is a piece that it doesn't show up very well. I don't know why it's so gray. Sometimes watercolor paper doesn't translate very well into a PDF. But this is a piece that I created for a friend who was sad and struggling. I came upon this pink rose bush while I was walking, and its beauty took my breath away. I wanted to share the feeling of closest to God that I experienced from observing this exquisite, perfect beauty. So I cut a stem and took it home so that I could paint it and take my time. The words of St. Julian of Norwich enhanced the connection that I felt. And I felt like I was able to impart that to my friend through the illustration and the words. So that's what I love about being a calligrapher, is that I can combine text and art and make it more meaningful. So that's it for this one.
These next couple of slides just show some of our activities. We were asked to do a program for our Wednesday night series, Lenten series on technology. And here is John Goddess singing Digital Sobriety, which Robin, we need to make a date to do that again, because it is a bang up of a great song that we introduced that night. And then we also, and this was really Julia's idea, and then Diane made it happen. We introduced these bookmarks and had pencils on the table, and people were asked to color their bookmarks during the program. And actually, Julia gave most of the program largely about Hildegard of Bingen. Can you run to the next slide, please? And then Sunday before last, we had Creation Care Sunday. We had I designed this banner for us with this really cute medieval nun on it, Hildegard of Bingen, and we had wonderful hymns and all things bright and beautiful. Great sermon. We had a bulletin cover or bulletin envelope or something that we handed out that we hope people would take home, and had some information about upcoming events and what we're trying to do at church. So, and then during adult forum, our rector talked about what the Episcopal Church, the larger Episcopal Church, is doing as far as creation care is concerned. Next slide, please.
One suspects that Hildegard is singing, painting, dancing, writing, acting, cooking, making wine, telling stories, connecting people across time and space, somewhere still, and is eager to make music with her sisters and brothers on earth. Matthew Fox. Hildegard speaks of the exquisite greening of trees and grass, of earth's lush greening, and Matthew Fox observes that clearly creativity and greening power are ultimately connected. I find this to be true when I green up my calligraphy with God's beautiful, colorful, natural world. There's just Not a whole lot to say about it other than flowers are great to decorate with.
Oh boy, it speaks for itself, Diana. This just makes me smile. It really, really does. So this is what we're up to, bringing art into our activities with the Hildegard Guild.
Shall I stop
Done?
sharing, Mary?
Yes,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I just a couple remarks, and I'm eager to move on and hear from our other registrants about experiences relevant to all of this. First off, I'm grateful to my fellow parishioners. I think we've got a great group, and these are only some of the members of our Green Guild. We've got growing interest in it. I don't point to our parish as wholly exemplary. It's not because we're so great, but it's because we're in the trenches. We're beginning this journey, and that's why I thought it appropriate to share with the group at large, and most of you members of faith communities, to think about how one can not only carry on the spirit of Hildegard and other kindred souls, but how to how to inform the rest of the parish so that it's not just a club that is separate, but is a leaven within the larger whole. So that's something I hope we could be sharing. I just a couple of other thoughts about the visionary aspect of Hildegard, which Julia talked about fruitfully, and Wendell poem is a vision as well. And I think what's distinctive and valuable that we can take from Hildegard is the recognition that to be a visionary is not always to be, as people imagine, very touchy-feely, irrational, right? It's to see clearly and deeply into the life of things. William Wordsworth has a beautiful poem about that, about seeing into the life of things, and that's, I think, as Christian members of a faith community, is what we aspire to do and to be. Julia mentioned, about how for Hildegard, music may be part of the essential fabric of the cosmos. So thank you, Julia. That's a very resonant phrase, and I think for me, it calls to mind the way in which for Hildegard, her theology is part of that. The theology is a way of seeing the wholeness of things, and that's why she's not just the sort of visionary who says, "Oh, I had a great vision the other night," but how do we make sense of the whole cosmos? And there's a lot of theological reflection in Hildegard. Hers might be called an integral theology in the fullest possible sense. And I think that's part of the aspiration to which we are all drawn. Well, I want to stop there and maybe just throw out that question about how maybe in the experience of various of you, and I think Robin has other parish experience to share and thoughts, but the sense, the vitality, the inspiration that one derives from thinking about the artistry of Hildegard and contemporary artists, and I think we've heard fruitfully from them. How can that extend into the larger life of our faith communities is a question, at least, that I would think worth exploring. But maybe I'll just ask Robin to take over and see what you might wish to contribute.
I guess I could share a little bit just what's happening in our parish. Again, not because it's exemplary, but it's just to show that we all have certain gifts and talents, and that may be the entry point for getting things going in our parish. That's no one size fits all at all, and the Spirit will blow as it will. And then I'd just like to ask a question or two, maybe to kick things off. We don't have a creation care committee in our parish. In some ways, I guess I am it. And because of the center, I haven't been able to do a whole lot in our parish. As you know, if you've heard me hold forth in previous webinars, I'm very interested in conversion, eco-conversion, getting people back in relationship with God and with all of creation, because that's the engine that moves things forward. And we don't have really a very developed at all adult education program in our parish. We have our youth, and after that, very little. So my concern has been, how do we get our parish to, as with most parishes, I think, or churches, there's a core of people who have a very alive faith, and then there's a whole group of people who kind of check in on Sunday, check the box, then head off for the rest of the week. And my concern has been, well, how do we get everybody, or at least most folks, into much more of a relationship with creation and with God and with one another? And so I gave a series of talks last year on our faith, but it was all couched in a very creation inclusive manner, so that we didn't advertise it as a creation care talk, environmental anything. But for me, since it's all one big pot, it's all one reality, then I just included it and talking about the incarnation. Well, of course, then obviously then creation comes in, and salvation, of course, comes in. And the people who came were that committed core of folks. And they I remember one man came up to me and said, "Robin, I had no idea." And he was well-read, devout Christian. And that seemed to be a lot of enthusiasm around it. So when we can tie in creation with the way we believe, and it expands us, it gives us a greater vision, and it starts creating the desire to form these relationships. And so there's people would be really interested in having, for instance, some nature contemplation. And so, of course, we could use the Living in an Icon program. Again, experience God, experience nature, and see how they work together. So there's the experiential, which I think art and contemplation move back and forth so strongly. And then there's the way we think. And so I'm hoping that down the road, maybe in the fall, we can start getting a more robust adult education program going that combines all this, and some retreats that start bringing people into a more alive relationship. On the ground, we're engaged in the capital campaign to improve our desperately needed campus. It's the best the 50s had to give us, and we could use a little bit more than that these days. There's one tiny bathroom for the whole church, for instance. And the grounds, we have 12 acres of land. It's largely grass, and a huge opportunity there. And so in critiquing the plan, we brought up the idea of how can we make this a place of contemplation, which people are really interested in already, but bringing it in much more in an inclusive nature, a creation inclusive sort of landscaping. So now, of course, my wife and I are on the garden committee as a result of that. And when the church is finally, the renovation's able to come about, there's a lot of interest in creating nooks of shrubbery and so forth, where people can sit in seclusion and talk to one another and talk to God. And so there's a lot of attention being given to kind of how do we use our grounds in such a way to foster, to speak what we believe. So here's where the buildings and grounds and our value system and our thoughts hopefully should be coherent with one another. And in for phase 3, they're even talking about having a meadow in the back there with a walking trail and a rosary sort of trail. But that would involve prairie, because that's a prairie. Used to have prairie down there in that area. So that's just a little bit of kind of where our parish is, very much in the beginning. But each of us have certain gifts and talents, and I think if we just hear what the Spirit is speaking to us, and take that little step forward, something will happen. So in the case of St. Mark and St. Paul, we have a group of gifted artists, and maybe that's the entry point. So with that in mind, I'd just like to ask you all, well, what's your vision? And we talked about vision. What's the vision you would like to have, you have for your, what the parish be like? And where does all this fit in? That may be a big question for you to answer, but I'd like to hear what you have to say. Mary?
Well, I just wanted to mention an image that Julia gave us at the very first of our committee meetings. She and her husband had been members, I believe, of a church where she said, when you walk in the front door, you know right away from what you see, I guess, that this is a church that really cares about creation. And Julia, would you like to say something? I mean, that was powerful to me. I mean, you don't want it to look too scrubbed and pristine and, oh my goodness, are they using herbicides? You know, what was it like, Julia?
Well, our cemetery was filling up, and our cemetery in Maryland went back to the 1640s, and they had used sonar and stuff to figure out where the bodies were, including a side that had no markers that we assume is where the slaves were buried. And so we needed more ways to allow people to be buried in some form in around our church. So we brought in a visionary guy who designs landscapes. And our priest at one point had been worked with flowers. And so he knew this guy and brought him in, and we designed actually altogether 5 burial sites that ranged everywhere from a simple garden, probably 20 feet by 20 feet, with cremation areas around it for a certain price. But you could also have your ashes buried in the garden under a rose bush or something. And that was the most affordable price. And that, now it is 10 years old, and it's a beautiful, lush garden. And then there were 2 other, I don't know what you call them exactly, not crematoriums, but more garden space with spaces where urns could be put. And it all looks out over the St. Mary's River. And it's right beside our little tiny church. So just walking in the driveway of the church, you're struck by all these gardens and all these ways of contemplation, places to sit. It really is. And tourists, we had a little walk, and tourists use it all the time. Community members use it, and it's right next to one of the historic St. Mary's buildings. So it's very visible for the whole community.
Thank you, Julia. I'd like to have a contrast with what you're describing. Then, of call on Fran. I see Fran has a hand up. Our parish at the moment is on a very busy boulevard. It's kind of a strip area. Um, and so cars going by all the time. And the entryway is basically a concrete runway. I think of it right up to the church. Very accessible in that sense, but a nicely paved way up there. And the architect for the new uh, campus has a um, circular drive that comes right up to the entrance of the church, so it will be more accessible for brides and so forth, and people with handicaps who need to get access to the church. But and then there's parking along the right side where the new administrative offices will be. So when you look at it, it's exalting the automobile and convenience, and there's no room for greenery. And so that portrays where the values are, as opposed to your case where you're saying we value this greenness and so forth, and we want to immerse ourselves in it. There's a little garden area off to the left, very manicured at the moment, and that's the nature that's around. And what I'm encouraging them to do is to get rid of the circular drive, have a little cul-de-sac off to the right, so people who need to get into church very quickly and easily with high heels on, for instance, can have an easy way up to the door, but it's off to the side, and then have a curved paths into the church, perhaps with plantings around it. So it's no straight line there. And so I think our buildings and grounds speak volumes of where we're coming from. And I very much appreciate the way you describe your little church in Maryland. And I see Fran has a hand up. So Fran, would you care to go
Sure.
ahead?
I'm from the Boston area, and our little Catholic church has just adopted Laudato Si as their mission. And I don't know if you're familiar with that document, but boy, oh boy, that really says it. And you're using some of the language. So I put in the chat 2 little videos that we use. We had a 5-week study group of the document because we figure we better find out, what it says. If that, and this mission is new for our parish. So, we've tried for years to get people more engaged in the creation care team, but it always seems like the same people. And, if you ask somebody specifically to do something, they will, but the planning has been kind of a problem. But we just started a garden ministry, and it's gangbusters. There are 20 people that come out. And we've been using information from the St. Catherine Conservation Center in New York. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you may know that St. Catherine Tekakwitha is the first Native American saint in the Catholic Church. And they promote gardening with a spiritual aspect, that you find places, just like you were saying, little places where you can sit and meditate or pray or whatever. And then we, in our parish, they're trying something new. I think we're the first one, actually. They're doing a biodiversity arc. So it's not just planting for our beauty, but it's also planting for the benefit of the creatures that are around, so it's sort of that full, the idea of the eco-conversion. You're not, I love Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. She just has a way of explaining that we really are part of nature, not apart from it. And that's kind of, in our Christian tradition, we kind of have to, make that conversion ourselves, because that isn't always the way we were taught, So it really is kind of a challenge. But anyhow, those are the resources that we've used. And there's also the National Wildlife Federation has got something called Sacred Spaces, I think, something like that. But it's similar, where I think there's a Baptist church in Boston that has followed their protocol. And again, native planting, you know. So it promotes the idea that you need to be mindful about what you do. And that's the big idea. Where does stuff come from? How do you use it? What happens to it afterwards? You know, and you know, the idea that you're participating in this web of life if you really
Yeah.
think about how you want to do it. So I really encourage you, Robin, to you know, introduce your idea, your new idea about how. And I think you know, what was said before is the impression that people get when they come to your parish. What does it say about you and your group? You know. So anyhow, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. So going back to my original question, then what's the vision we have for our parish or for our church congregation? Um, what would you like to see? Because what I hear from Hildegard is that she had this holistic vision, right? But that needs to get incarnated into our parish life. So I'd just like to throw out what what would it what would an invigorated viriditas type parish be like? How would you know it when you encountered it? And then maybe how do you get started towards that? You had mentioned, Fran, the garden, that's where it took off. Well, you know,
Mhm.
where is the energy in your parish? And is there a way to make it creation inclusive across the parish so that whatever we do includes that? And I was thinking, in your case, Fran, with the garden, well, what a wonderful opportunity to teach Ora et Labora,
Mm.
the Christian or Benedictine version of mindfulness, right? Praying as you work, so that everything you do is a prayer, and that's, you know, that's giving yourself totally to it, making yourself totally attentive. We talked about attention earlier, doing it out of love, not doing it to get it done,
Mm.
but doing it for its own sake because it's worthy, because you're planting, you're sowing, you're weeding is all a worthy activity to create something beautiful and something that's thriving. And so we have these little teaching moments, right? So when the gardening group gets together to start its day's work and say, well, let's talk about Ora et Labora, how we might do it, or just a little thing about why are we doing this? Why is this important? Or why
Mm.
do we come alive when we're here? Uh,
Mhm.
who are these plants here? Why are they worthy of our attention, et cetera, et cetera?
Mm.
And so we don't have to have some big creation care program. It's right there in front of us.
Mm.
So that's just a kind of my little soapbox,
Mhm.
but I think it's an important idea. Dave, you've raised your hand.
Hi, good evening. Um, I'm drawn to that image at the very, very beginning of the clock and the seasons. And if we're not sure where we are or what we are to do, maybe we begin by reflecting on where are we in that clock? Are we sowing seeds? Are we vacationing and resting? Are we harvesting? Are we preparing for a legacy time and the feeding of the generations to come? I think if you played with, in a meditative way, that clock, you would find some inspiration to do that. And there would be room then for individuals or families or groups to say, well, we're more at this season than that season, instead of assuming that, well, we should find, as you said, one method for everybody. No, I don't know.
Right.
Um, I I have a wonderment about that hour between 11 and midnight. What is that hour between 11 and midnight when the tree is barren? And what's the story then? Are we looking at the end of the earth with the continuance of creation? Are we talking about a re-enlivening of creation? And that will reflect our hopes and our fears and our energies. I want to say I wish I could be part of your congregation and play with all the colors. I want a whole mess of those bookmarks. um, um, but I'm also struck by, again, unknowingly we're attracted to flowers and fertility and that. And it would be really neat. There's a strange phenomenon with the skies here in Calgary that the cloud formations are never the same, and the many shades of gray are phenomenal and beautiful. What if you gave some people, gave 6 people 6 different gray crayons and said, come back with an image of hope or something. Just to draw us out of, it ought to be green and lush and fertile, and I don't know. Maybe not everybody's in that space. And, I see a lot of beauty in gray hair and wrinkles. Just saying.
I had a couple of reflections just to follow from Robin's comment, which somehow is new to me, Robin. That the idea, because I must admit, I myself look for, some kind of blueprint for moving forward with creation care. But as you pointed out, there may be a variety of such. And Dave, you were just talking about another way to do that. And what the vision of what we see isn't only what we see outwardly with the physical eyes again. So that, as you also noted, Robin, part of what I think we can aspire to is to weave our vision of a spirit-infused cosmos into our education programs, our standard catechesis faith formation programs, where it usually doesn't fit. So that we don't want our guilds or our green groups to be focused only on actions in the outward sphere, but it's part of a spiritual formation, mental formation, and all the rest. And I think, again, for me, that's part of what Hildegard inspires me about. But again, there are a variety of ways that this could be moved forward, whether with a garden group or a group interested in buildings or formation, and maybe, as Dave was indicating, a certain time when one or another of those initiatives would be important to pursue.
Kathy has her hand up.
And Molly after that.
And Molly then.
Well, one thing about Hildegard, she was an herbalist, and she would tend to the local people. And there's a movement happening right now called slow medicine, which is kind of based on her methods, because she spent a lot of time looking at people and knowing what they needed and how they were growing, and so I think that approach could also work for what you want to happen in your parish. And so, like, I imagine at the parish of St. Mark and St. Paul that the seeds were already there. You already had these artists in place, and then so that grew out of. I feel like that grew out of that parish. So and that, I imagine that is what happens. But there's nothing wrong with thinking, I'm going to look at what we have here and see what can grow out of our parish. And I also like the infinity symbol that Julia brought up, and I thought about that with the Dave's thing, where are you? What the hour between 11 and 12? Well, there's that natural thing. I mean, it's very seasonal. So, I I really appreciate this discussion and kind of the organic nature of it and how we can follow that in maybe how we um, approach getting our congregations involved with creation care.
Thank you, Kathy. Molly?
Yeah, the experience that I've had with vision is that I've had to be open to change my vision. As a vision that I started with, like when I first started with CCC and that kind of stuff, was one thing, and it has totally changed since then because that didn't work. And being willing to say, okay, that vision is not working. Let me try something else. But I've really gone along the lines of you, like you, Robin, of the eco conversion, because I think without that, I think I'm just spinning wheels all the time. And I have found that, and just with Hildegard, she's basically into the experiential type of stuff of art, music, and that sort of stuff. And I have found that I've had a lot of success with experiential things. We did Stations of the Cross in nature on our property. I had people that, oh my God, I was just witnessing spiritual eco conversion in front of my eyes,
Wow.
just by their reaction to it. And I have found that by doing that, I'm having more success. Now it does fall, a lot of the work does fall on me. I don't really necessarily have a team to do it. And that's okay. I mean, I can get people to help from time to time. But as far as the visionary part, but I think one of the best things that I've seen happen is the eco conversion in my priest, coming from up in his head all the time to really down into his heart and really embracing creation care as for what it is. And going from, well, we've done Earth Day several days. We're getting ready to do Earth Day this weekend. And the liturgy that he came up with, I'm going, oh my gosh, this is like, I've never seen this before from him. Going from just like standard Episcopal, maybe prayers for the people or whatever. But he's really gone into everybody bringing out water and dirt and flowers. And this is coming from him. And I'm going, something is happening just by I think by the vision that I have of putting things out there for people to do. Like with the kids, I have creation care Sunday school. I just take them out we have a meditation garden. I just take them out there and let them pick up sticks. We talk about it. And I say, what do you see? What do you smell? Bought some strawberries out there. What do you taste? But it's like, but I think that experiential thing, just like art and music, is very powerful way to get that eco conversion to begin.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say we're there. We're not there. But to get it to begin, I think is planting those seeds, like you say.
Yeah. Thank you, Molly. And what I hear you say, and I think Kathy and then our panel, is that what matters is relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Our head is fine, but it's our heart that drives us. And it's the heart that moves us to do things. You may say, oh, yes, I agree with that, but never do anything because in many ways it's just a head trip and it's not where we're at. But if we can get people into a relationship with creation and with God and with one another, because it's all of a piece, it's the relationships that matter. So finding ways to introduce people, to get people out, whether they be children or adults. And you can do that in so many different ways. Art is certainly a powerful way to do that. And if you're noticing and then relating to something by trying to draw it, that's really a powerful. Thomas Merton said, if you really want to contemplate, you should learn how to draw. And he said, you don't have to draw them well, you just draw. So that's kind of a theme that I hear going through our evening here is relationship. And relationships are deepened when we understand the one we're relating to. And so our head is important too. But it's the heart that's going to make things happen. And then if our thoughts and our worldview is in concert with our experience. So then you have a whole person who can then really relate and be effective in whatever way God would have them be effective. We're
And I
coming to
think
the end of our,
modeling, the modeling is important too.
yes,
Like,
modeling.
like if you're modeling, hey, this garden is doing something for me, and you're not even really saying anything about it, just doing it, all of a
Yeah.
sudden people are going, oh, I might want to do that. I might want to come out there. So, that part is important too.
Very much. Thank you. There's a concept I'm fond of, but I'll just throw out real quickly. The idea of what they call social or behavioral contagion. If you
Hmm.
look at social media, how things spread so quickly, but it's because there's somebody who people trust for some reason or other says something or models something, woof, these changes occur. Well, and the same thing, Molly, you know, if you're modeling something in your parish and other people know you and respect you, and they say, "Oh, look what it's Molly really comes alive when she talks about that.
Mhm.
Maybe I should try it," and that starts spreading. Kate, I think you're muted. Are you there? I see you raised your hand.
Yes. I just learned how to raise my hand, so that explains the pause. I'm joining you from outside of Madison, Wisconsin, and my parish is in Madison, St. Andrew's Episcopal Church, where we have a relatively new guild for doing flower arranging. We call it the Flower Guild. And that got started because I'm a flower farmer, and I felt that some of the abundance of my flower farm should go to my parish. And they organized designers. They learned from professional designers how to design for altar arrangements for Sundays, and they also designated couriers to come out to my farm, which is a long way from Madison, to pick up the flowers on Fridays. And some of those people are just nature enthusiasts who come out to listen to the birds while they, talk to me about whatever the flowers are that I've prepared for the week. And so I'm fascinated by this idea of having a patron for the activities of a guild. A flower guild could actually be more than that. It could be also merged with the garden guild, which is taking care of the grounds around the parish, which are very urban and relatively small. But I'd also like to expand it into giving young people more experience with being out in the woods and the fields, and perhaps coming to learn to plant flowers in the spring and things like that.
Wow.
So that's why I'm fascinated by what you all are doing, and would like to transfer some of those ideas here.
Well,
Did that come through?
Oh, yes.
Good.
Oh, thank you so much, Kate. That I really appreciate you sharing that. And it strikes me that what you said is very wise. Seeing where the energy is in your parish. Those are the ones who are doing something. And then find what common cause you can have. You don't have to try to get them to become creation carers, but you get them out in the garden. You start talking about what's going on, why we're doing it, and then the next thing may be taking children out into the woods, and it's just an organic growing process that happens. And then you can start saying, well, gosh, what do we believe, and how is that in concert with this? And you can just have little discussion. I don't know. The Spirit moves as it will move. So I encourage you to see where the Spirit's moving in your parish. Find a common language that you can use. Find out what their concerns are and the desires, and share and see what happens. And if a door opens, open it up and look through and see what's on the other side. If the door shuts, pray that God will open another door for you. And surprising things happen when we get out of the way. With the center, in my experience, the more I have let go of it's got to go, this has got to happen, and that's got to happen. Oh, gee, I hope this happens. Just saying, all right, God, it's in your hands. It's amazing how things start to move. So really, it's for us, I think, it's that whole letting go of expectations and trust and praying is our own conversion is where things can really start. One last little comment, and I guess we should probably end for the evening, but a friend mentioned Laudato Si. If you haven't read it, get you a copy. You can download it for free off the internet, and of course there are printed versions. But it's a wonderful, readable document. When it came out, I guess 11 years ago now, something like that, and I read it, I said, finally somebody is putting it all together. I've been so frustrated by the partial church pronouncements of whatever denomination happens to be. And I read a bunch. I think, gee. And then this one came. I said, wow. They really put it together. So I highly recommend it. The Pope's really speaking to everybody. It's not a purely Catholic document. If you've read it, you know what I mean. He's even talking to the people who don't consider themselves religious. But it's very powerful, well written, easy to read. And so I highly recommend it to you.
Can you repeat the name of that?
Yes, let's see. Let me try to write it in the chat here for it's Laudato Si.